Hello, hello. Here we are again, live on Broadcast Team Alpha, YouTube, 3 TV stations, and that's D Live, Twitch TV, and Vaughn Live TV, and a bunch of other places we're sending it out to. And we're here for some cutting edge conversations and quantum possibilities. And we're going to create some really cute things tonight. My name is Augie, and my co host Nori could not make it tonight. You know what happens when you're busy? Things happen, so she just couldn't be here. But I promise you, well, I almost promise you that she will be here next week. So we will enjoy that. We have a phenomenal guest with us tonight. But first, I'd like to tell you how you can also connect with us. You will find us on broadcastteamalpha.com, and we are on YouTube with the same name. And while you're there, check out the other shows also. We got some doozies, a lot of the stuff that you're not supposed to know about, and that gets pretty hairy sometimes. And while on YouTube, also, if you if you like what you see, also support us on the chat feature, super chat feature. That would be really appreciated. It tells us that we are doing the right thing. So now let me talk to you a little bit about our guest. Our guest has been here, I think, twice before, and we really enjoy having him here because he is so full of knowledge. It is Adam Oliver Stokes, and I should correct myself, that is Professor Adam Oliver Stokes, because that he is, and we don't have professors here very often, but this is a good time. And he holds a degree from Duke University and Yale Divinity School on religious and biblical studies. He understands several languages, including Hebrew, ancient Greek, Latin, and German. And he writes and lectures on ancient cultures and civilizations, with a special interest in ancient American civilizations and the giants of the Americas. Oh, right up my alley. I want to hear more about that. His work is also published in many journals and publications around the world. He is a featured guest also on many podcasts and radio shows. And he has a book out there. And I wrote down the title of the book to make sure I didn't forget it. It is From Egypt to Ohio, this Semitic origin of the giants of North America.
Yeah.
Key word there is Semitic. We're going to hear more about that because there's a story behind that. And he's also here to tell us about what's behind the curtain of ancient American history and the 9 to 22-foot tall giants roaming around the Americas in the distant past. So let's step back in time and learn some of the things the history books are not telling us about. So, welcome to the show, Adam.
Thank you, Aki. Great to be here. Thank you for having me. Let's do this.
Oh, yeah, this will be good. And I also had another note there. That is, you have a website. Actually, the website is Giants of North America. Is that it? That's
That's actually not mine. That's another website that's on Instagram. Great site
oh
that has a lot of primary newspaper clippings and stuff directly from the period. So primary sources on giants in North America. But I
but
do have an Instagram site, Adam the Giant Guy 2019. But
yeah,
I'm friends with the dude who has the Giants of North America site on Instagram.
oh,
Great
that's good.
site. Highly, I'm glad you mentioned that. Very highly recommended. A lot of
That
people come in and they'll say, well, you're just making up this stuff about, the Smithsonian carting off these giants. There were never any giants that were found. And this guy literally has thousands of newspaper clippings, contemporary newspaper clippings,
wow.
and detailed evidence, pictures, everything of the giants that they found in the 19th and early 20th century.
Yeah, I know. I've seen a lot of these newspaper clippings too from newspapers like say 100 years ago when they wrote
Hmm.
about, hey, we found this 12-foot tall skeleton in the ground when you were trying to dig a new basement here. What's the story? And
Yes.
they write about it. They
Yes.
don't do that anymore.
No, they sure don't. They sure don't. And these were not. This wasn't just one newspaper. It wasn't just like the Baltimore Sun. These were newspapers all over the country in various towns and in various cities. So everybody knew about this stuff. But as you can see in modern times, the powers that be had an agenda. They pushed that agenda as hard as possible, and they were very successful in that agenda. And that agenda was basically to uh, eliminate, to remove any history in North America prior to the time of Columbus.
Yeah,
That was a specific move from the academic institutions here in America with the backing of the United States government. Because if they showed that there was history prior to Columbus, that meant that the native inhabitants were actually human beings and people with their own culture and own civilization, just as mighty as the ancient civilizations of Greece and Rome. And you can't have that because the government needs that land. They need to get that land from the Native Americans. So what do? They bring in academia, same as today, their own to push their own agenda.
yeah, yeah. And
And so now, when
speaking
you
of,
talk about giants, people say there was never any such thing as giants, which is utter garbage.
yeah, absolutely. And speaking of Columbus, also, they say that Columbus discovered America. Well, guess what? He discovered the Caribbean. There was
Mm-hmm.
another guy. His name was Americus.
Mm-hmm.
That actually was the first one from Europe around 1500 to make it to the American continent.
Yes.
That's why it's called America,
Yes.
because of his Americus, his name.
Yeah, he got close. He got close, like you said, to the Caribbean. So he's a couple hundred miles away from the Florida shoreline. But yeah, he never got to mainland America. And it's funny because my wife is Haitian, and all of those places, all the cities and towns in Haiti, they get their names from Christopher Columbus's first discovery. But he was in Haiti. He was not in Florida. He was not in North America. So just to say that American history begins with Columbus is problematic right there.
Yeah, and discovering America, well, there were Native Americans here.
Yes, yes. And there were people who were discovering America for the old world way before Columbus and thousands of years before Columbus.
Yeah, that is one point that I wrote down to talk about, that intercontinental travel.
Hmm.
There is records that, well, we know Leif Erikson, he made it
Yes.
to Vinland in about 1020, about that.
Yeah.
But there
There's
were
no.
people before him.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can't. Nobody can discredit the Vikings and kind of the Netherlands region that we're exploring, North America. We have absolute, proof of that. But the Vikings, those groups, as they will admit, they learned, how to navigate and where to go from, like you said, these prior groups who have been going across the Atlantic for thousands of years before then, from all over the old world. So Phoenicians, Hebrews, Egyptians, um, Polynesians, all making their way over here and intermingling with Native American cultures, and that's what explains, so many of the similarities that we find with cultures all around the world. And mainstream academia wants to push back on this and say, oh, these are just unique cultures that developed um, on their own, all by themselves. But the record clearly shows cultural diffusionism all over the world.
Yeah. And there were some ancient technologies that in fact, there is writing in the old Norwegian history books,
Hmm.
speaking of the Vikings, have compasses.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
way they did that, and this is brand new actually for most people, and that is that they had a long spike, thin spike of hardened iron, but actually I probably should call it steel,
Yeah.
and then they kept pounding on one end of it until they loosened up so many electrons in it that they were floating around. And this actually, these electrons, they reacted to the earth magnetic field, so one end of it was always pointing north. That way they put it on top of a leaf and they floated it in a bowl of water, and they used that as a compass because that needle pointed north, and they kept the angle up to where they're going in relation to that needle.
And clearly they were using navigational devices like that because they went back and forth. This wasn't just one migration to the Americas and they stayed there. They went back, they reported it. There's actually, it's interesting, there's a Latin text I have my students read of a Viking, very well educated. We think of the Vikings as just warriors, but extremely well educated.
Yeah,
He was a member of the church and he wrote a Latin text chronicling what he found in America. And I have my students whenever we talk about real American history, read, translate, and read that text. The
yeah,
Vikings were just fascinating because another thing, the ships that they used are so well preserved. Even today, if you took a ship out of the museum, a Viking ship out of the museum, it would still be able to navigate. So imagine this ship at the top at the peak of its efficiency thousands of years ago. This wasn't just jumping in a piece of wood and floating, floating and hope you land somewhere. This was a meticulously designed vessel, probably the best darn sailing vessel
yeah,
of the Middle Ages.
yeah. Yeah, and the Vikings, they really got around because there is evidence of a Viking ship being found in the silt in the ground right outside of southwest Arizona.
Mm, mm. Well, there's a bunch. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. There are a bunch of places in the Midwest where there were probably rivers, and I mentioned in my book. This is probably how we get some of the Hebrew influenced cultures that we see in the Midwest. For example, the Los Lunas stone, which has a copy of the Ten Commandments on it. They probably sailed right up these rivers into the Midwest, but these rivers
Yeah,
over the course of time, as often happens, no longer exist. Same for in Kentucky, for example, there was a mound that I visited in October, which used to be connected next to a river. That river has dried up, but the river was very important for spiritual purposes, for the spiritual understanding of the people who were there. You can't really understand the mound without realizing that there was a river there, but the river no longer exists.
yeah, there was a Viking ship found not too far from St. Louis also, so they did get
Wow.
around.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, and you mentioned Hebrew text also, and they were also here. They were
Hmm.
traveling across.
Hmm. They traveled across many times. So if you recall from your Old Testament, the Israelites were always being conquered by a particular group of people, whether it be the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and then later on in the time of after the time of Christ, the Romans. Um, and so whenever, and we can document this, whenever that happened, they would flee. They would try to get as far away from the people as possible. Where would they flee? They would flee west. It wasn't just good enough for them to reach, the western edge of Europe, say France or even into the island of England. They kept going and going and going. And what's really fascinating, one of the things that I found really fascinating in my research of this is we can date different migrations of Israelites, of Jews during these times. So, for example, the Menorah Mound, which is a mound in North America. I believe that's in Ohio. I wrote about this in Ancient American Magazine. There's a menorah mound, and it has a nine-pointed menorah. Before the time of the Maccabees, in the second century BCE, the menorah would only have had 7 points. But
Oh,
when the story of when the Hasmonean Empire took over, and there's a story. This is basically the story of Hanukkah, when you have the nine stemmed menorah that only occurs in the Hasmonean period. So we know that whatever Jews settled in the area, whatever Israelites settled in the area of the menorah mound, they settled there around that time, no later than the Maccabean period during the Hasmonean Empire.
hmm. Yeah,
So yeah,
those
multiple migrations.
yeah, those 12 tribes, they scattered, went probably everywhere, like
Yes.
many of them on the European continent, like the House of Dan went north to the northern part of actually the European continent and formed Denmark.
Yes.
Obviously, Dan
Yes.
for Denmark, but they went everywhere and some of them went to the Americas.
Yeah, but just so some of them settled, like you said, in the Netherlands region. So Joseph Smith, I always bring him up because of my Latter Day Saint background. Um, he argues that basically anybody from Norway, Denmark, etc., was descended, just like you said, from the tribe of Dan. So they had biblical lineage. And when he would do the patriarchal blessing, which is the blessing that you get when you're initiated into the church, if you came from those regions of Europe, which many of the early converts did, they sailed to America and joined the Mormon Church. He would give the patriarchal blessing, saying that they were descended, like you said, directly from the patriarch Dan. But so some of them stayed, and then some of them said, no, we need to go a little bit further to avoid persecution, and that's how they got to North America, where they encountered the Native Americans.
Yeah. And when you treated the Native Americans with respect, they became your friends.
Yes, yes. And so there's a fusion, a lot of Native American culture, and people have written on this. People were writing on it in colonial times, and even now, a lot of Native American culture is, you can see remnants of Hebrew culture influencing it. So there is in Indian Native American mysticism a phrase "Yah," which is a special word. I probably shouldn't even be pronouncing it. Forgive me, my Native American brothers and sisters. But that comes from the term Yah, which is the first part of the name for God in Hebrew. So, and you ask any Indian shaman that you ever see, and they will tell you that that's the case. I'm not making this up. This isn't Adam Stokes making anything up. Native American shaman will tell you that that is the case, and that is direct cultural, again, cultural diffusionism, cultural influence of the Hebrews on Native American culture.
That obviously show the cross ocean contact.
Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah, you mentioned Joseph Smith, and I know when he walked across the North American continent, it is in his writings that
Yes.
he ran into giants.
Yes, yes, and he talks about. So there's a book which a lot of LDS people use. It's kind of like a devotional teachings of Joseph Smith, but it gives basically a collection collected by his mother after he was killed, after he was martyred, collected by his mom and published. And he talks about the people in the Book of Mormon, the Nephites, connecting them to these giants who are scattered throughout the Midwest, and he mentions that specifically. Yes, and he was very much kind of a amateur archaeologist himself. He went around collecting this stuff, so skeletons, mummies, papyri, anything that he could find, and he says, this is stuff that came from the old world to the new world.
Yeah, yeah. I just read a little bit about that, and now you have studied that book and his writings much more probably than most. And do you see any details about those giants that he ran into?
Well, the Book of Mormon says that, for example, it uses this term, and I highlight this in my book From Egypt to Ohio, that the Nephites and their descendants were quote unquote large in stature. And if you look in the Bible, the only time that's used is to refer to people who are giants. So
Yeah,
Goliath, some of the other Philistine giants, even metaphorically, for example, in the book of Isaiah, it says Assyria is as tall, as high in stature as a cedar tree. A cedar tree is pretty darn huge, pretty darn tall, excuse me. Um, so we get from that language, we get kind of an idea that these were taller than average people, possibly, if we're going with Goliath, for example, 9 feet. But there's variance here because they are intermixing with the native inhabitants. So, for example, at the beginning of colonial times, when European settlers start to come here, they encounter some giants and some Native American giants who are only 7 feet tall, which is still really tall, even by our standards. But that's kind of because of genetic intermixing, and because you have gigantic individuals mixing with normal sized individuals. Uh, the giants are not quite as tall. Um, the living giants are not quite as tall as their ancestors. We find those super gigantic giants in the burial mounds um, in the earthworks throughout North America.
yeah. There's a whole bunch of those that Smithsonian got away with, but even
Yes.
a lot before. Back in Europe, there is old writings about the Roman Empire. They used the giant, or the German giants, they call them,
Hmm.
which was also large in stature. They used them if they were in battle. They used them in the front because then it would be more menacing to the opponent
Hmm.
that they were trying to fight.
Hmm.
And they were one arm. What should I call it? An armbrest, or there's an armor that was found made of iron, made for a man, but it weighed 800 pounds and it was huge.
Yeah,
That is sitting in a museum in Paris.
yeah,
And that thing, I mean, carrying 800 pounds into battle, you had to be a pretty forceful guy.
yeah, yeah. One of the things, I'm glad you mentioned that, Aki, because one of the things that often goes overlooked when I talk about, this kind of group of, I call them hybrid Israelite giants, is that we see this kind of in some very famous characters in the Old Testament. So when David's fighting Goliath, so Goliath, get this, Goliath is a big giant. But when David knocks Goliath down, it says that David picked up his sword. And we already have the description of his sword. That sword was like 10 feet or 12 feet long. For David to pick up that sword, David has to be of extraordinary height as well. Maybe not as tall as Goliath, but this isn't any. He's not my size.
Yeah,
He's not five
he
two.
was he was no wimp.
So, which is suggesting that he might have been descended from a particular lineage of giants as well. It's funny, Augie, because years ago, when I was studying in Germany, we took a field trip to Prague, in the Czech Republic, and got to see the palace of the emperor. That was the palace for the Holy Roman Empire, way back in the day. One of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. But like you just mentioned, there was this. I remember going to the weapons room, and there was this sword that easily spanned the length of my wall over here, and I was always like really curious as to who was wielding that sword because no ordinary person was wielding that, and it wasn't made for decoration. The sword was clearly used by someone. So I'm pretty sure there was a giant person wielding that
Well, let's revert back to the 23-foot tall skeleton then. Someone like that could have had a sword
easily.
like that
Yeah,
because
easily.
the old Japanese swords were, some of them, the samurais used, were as long as the person carrying it.
Yeah, yeah, yes. So easily, yeah. I mean, that would for the sword I saw in Prague, it would have to be a 20-foot giant or something like that.
Yeah.
So, but that would be easy for him to carry. So there's evidence of giants, even where we don't expect it. So
Yeah, there must have
that's
been a
evidence.
civilization of giants at one time.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the Old Testament hints at that when it talks about during Noah's time, these giants, gigantes, in the Latin and the Greek, intermingled with human women and had children by them. And it never says the Bible is usually good at saying where everybody is from. This guy came from Babylon. This guy came from Egypt. Doesn't say where the giants came from, and I think the giants came from some civilization that was so ancient that even the biblical authors didn't know where they came from. If I had to guess, if I had to put money down on it, Agi, I would say Atlantis. But it doesn't. The Bible doesn't necessarily say. But yes, there was some prior. I think there was a very, very ancient civilization of giants that eventually intermingled with Israel's line, beginning with Noah and continuing, all the way down into the Davidic period.
Yeah. And there are some prominent people too that has been very tall. If you go back about 1700, no, 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 close to 2000 years, the Roman Emperor Maximus Thrax,
Mm-hmm.
his bed was 13 foot long.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If I was only 6 or 7 foot tall, I wouldn't have a bed that was 13 foot long.
No, no, absolutely not. And he was, and it's funny if you look at the contemporary writings in Latin, he's made fun of. He's not actually. I don't think he was born in Rome. I think he's actually German in descent,
Yes,
half of the
yes, he
emperor.
was.
Yeah, and so um, which is interesting. There, given going back to what you were saying about the German giants and what the Romans using them. Um, but yeah, the contemporary literature on him is that he was of extraordinary stature, and yeah, definitely probably a descendant of this long lost race of giants.
Yeah, probably a German giant.
Yeah,
And his problem was that he wanted to make friends with everybody,
yeah,
and
he
he
was too
created
nice,
a new
friendly giant.
consolidated religions, and he wanted to make friends. He went to his enemies and say, "Hey, we've been fighting long enough. Let's quit this stuff."
Yeah,
And
yeah, you can't do
so he
that.
only lasted for 2 years, and they killed
Yep,
him, and then he got another guy in.
yep. It figures. It figures. So yeah, but a very a very fascinating character.
Yeah, well, this just dwell on a little bit more on the giants because that ties into the Smithsonian. They actually, not very long ago, I think about a year ago, there was a Supreme Court ruling that was handed down because somebody sued the Smithsonian and demanded that they release the records of the giant skeletons.
Hmm. And they
And of
slowly.
course, Smithsonian lost. So they now, if you write to them and
Mhm.
ask them to get the records, they have to give it to you.
Yep. There's a couple of my colleagues online who have published a little bit of it. If you write them, you're absolutely correct, Aki. If you write them, they give you little snippets. They try to release the material very. They got to release it, like you said, but they release it very slowly and in snippets. But what's coming to light is that what the Smithsonian claims they never had, they have. It's right in their basement, and cataloged and logged into their computer and everything. Um, so they have this stuff. But again, um, I think the Smithsonian is a. I love the Smithsonian. In many ways. I take my kids down there, down to the Smithsonian Institute every summer. But I think that they are a victim of their own success, meaning that what the Smithsonian started out as with this agenda to kind of cover and erase history has has been so successful in mainstream academia they can't go back even if they wanted to. So it's kind of up to us as independent researchers to kind of expose this information. So and yes, I was delighted with the ruling where the Smithsonian had to release stuff. And they are releasing it, but they're trying to, just like with alien disclosure, they're just going at a very slow, as slow as
Yeah,
possible pace. And perhaps for similar reasons, I think the government's afraid that with alien disclosure that people will go crazy and it will be too much for them. I think a similar thing is happening. What happens if we redo all of what we've considered to be American history? What are the implications of that, especially for academia, which has kind of built itself up on these straw legs of this, in my view, this completely false and wrong narrative about ancient American history.
yeah. That, and I think it goes further too, is that religion has had so much control of the
Yeah,
country that religion doesn't want any competition of any kind. They
yeah,
want to be the absolute biggest and the best out there. And if you find that it's been giants at 23 foot tall that have their own society and great technologies, then we don't look too good
yeah,
anymore. And
yeah,
besides that, control. And
yeah.
another thing that they will never admit to, and that is that they have lied to you for 100,
Yeah,
200.
absolutely. Straight to your face. Yes.
Yeah, they can admit that,
Yeah.
because, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's. Oh, by the way, if people go to my and Nori's website, Broadcast Team Alpha, in the picture gallery, there's a picture of a guy in the Smithsonian. I'm sure it's in the basement somewhere, hidden away. There's a guy standing in front of a human skull that is 3 foot across the temples.
Yeah. Definitely from a giant.
Yeah, and that's a real picture. It's been verified. So yeah, that's wow. But let's go from that to something that is really interesting for me, and I hope for the listeners too and the viewers. In the old scriptures, there is talk of people not from here, but coming from space. and walk among us.
Yeah.
Can we go there? I love
I'd
to.
love to go there. Yes, absolutely. Let's do it. Yeah, I think I always say this. If you ever need an encyclopedia for giants and aliens, I think the Bible would be one of your best sources, because many of the beings that the Bible calls angels or malachim are actually straight up UFO encounters. Now, some malachim sometimes are used for human beings. Most of the time, they're used for these very weird. We call them divine beings, but it's interchangeable. Alien, angel, same thing.
Yeah, yeah, and of course the word angel originates back at the old Sumerian language, means angel, which means messenger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. People who are sent with a message. So if you're getting
Yeah,
sent, where are you coming from? So yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And
they probably have been sending us message for thousands of years, basically saying, "Hey, get your stuff together. You know, you're destroying yourself."
indeed, indeed. And I'm going to get kind of into some trouble for this, but I'll just say it. It's There's a really interesting uh, variant in the Latin for God's name. So God is called Dominus Exercitus, and if you translate that, especially in classical Latin, that means commander or general of the army. Um, so that's a really odd name for a deity. So what does that mean? I've always thought that that was some type of referring to some type of intergalactic leader of some type of intergalactic council, or intergalactic group uh, that basically oversaw, these different planets. And like you said, they've been trying to help us Earthlings get back on track. But we are just a stubborn group of people.
Yeah, I guess we've never learned so far anyway. But speaking of
We're
that
getting there.
word God, I've been reading Sumerian tablets, and I see in there they talk about the word God. Parasites have been given a interpretation it was never meant to have, because it in the old Sumerian language it means great leader.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that goes along with what you're saying. The head of the army, he would be a great leader. So
Yes.
there's two different interpretation of the same concept.
Exactly. And when the writers of the Old Testament come along, who are way after the Sumerian text themselves,
Yeah.
they take that term and change it to Elohim or just El, which is misleading. That means that's a more religious, theological term meaning God, but that's not what the original Sumerian says. It says, these are leaders, these are bright leaders, but you don't have the term God in a theological sense is not used for them, which
Hmm.
begs the question, what are they?
Yeah. Have you read anything about these, especially out of India? They talk about these shining ones.
Hmm. Hmm. So when I was in graduate school, in divinity school, I had to, which I think was great. We had to take a non-Christian course, and so I chose Hinduism, and we spent a
Ooh.
semester. It was really fascinating. I visited a Hindu temple, but we spent a semester reading the Mahabharata, and in the Mahabharata, there are well, it's just a fascinating book in general, but there is this clearly advanced technology, these flying machines piloted. So the machines are shiny, and the machines are piloted by these uh, shiny ones, these shiny beings. And it's interesting because um, in the Hindu scriptures, that same kind of term "shining ones" is found, like you said, in the Sumerian text, the shining ones. So it seems like we have probably the same group of people, the same group of aliens, I should say, appearing all over the world. So not just in
Yeah.
Sumer, but also India and elsewhere. So very fascinating stuff there. I think that the Mahabharata, and I know I said this to you when we were talking earlier, I think even more so than the Bible, the Mahabharata is proof of ancient extraterrestrial contact.
Hmm.
Very clear on that.
And I also remember reading something, oh God, that's got to be a couple of decades ago, about In the original writings of the Quran, they also speak of the shining ones that came with a message and guidance for them
Hmm.
when
Hmm.
they were in trouble.
Yes, yes. So you have the angel again, the angels who the shiny ones who come. Uh, so you have Allah who is God, but Allah has all of these angels, all of these intermediaries that come and help the people. And in theological language, we think that those are those angels, angels or something like that. But um, likely the same UFOs, the same extraterrestrial beings
Yeah,
that we find in these other texts. And we also have one of my favorite stories in the Quran is this story of the green man who comes to Moses, and it's a really interesting story. I'm kind of paraphrasing it, but the green man is walking with Moses, and the green man does these weird things. So he makes a boat with some people in it drown. Um, he destroys a woman's crops, I believe. And Moses is like, "Why are you doing this?" And he's like, "I have, foresight. So those people who were in the boat, um, they were going to, end up doing evil in the world. This woman's crops, who I destroyed, those crops would be poisonous. She wouldn't be able to eat them anyway. I destroyed them so that good crops would grow." And so he says, "You can't see the same way that I see." And I find that always very profound because that means, not only are we talking about extraterrestrial beings here, but extraterrestrial beings that have some type of psychic foresight, some type of psychic foreknowledge. They can see further into the future than we can with our limited abilities. So I think my point here is that we get some clues in these ancient religious texts, not only that they're extraterrestrials, but what their attributes are. They can also see into the future. And we get that a lot in the Old Testament as well. When the angels, the Malachim come, they're always announcing future events that end up taking place with human beings.
well, it's obviously the Green Man was an extraterrestrial, but
Hmm.
maybe he also came from the future, so he would have seen what would have happened if he had
Yeah,
not destroyed that crop.
yeah, yeah,
Parallel timeline.
yeah, yeah. Which some people have argued that aliens are, from our future. So
Hmm. Do you write about these things in your book also?
I do not touch on the alien on extraterrestrials in from Egypt to Ohio, but it's something I have touched on elsewhere in some articles and stuff. It's always been very fascinating to me, and I
Yeah,
definitely do hope to write a book about it one day.
yeah.
I feel like there's so many good books. One of the reasons I haven't done it, there's so many good books out there. Xavier Hayes, Eric Von Daniken, um, who have touched on it, but I'm going to try and see what perspective I can bring to it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's not the only story about green men actually, or the green. And then you have the green children of wolf pits over in England.
Mm,
They
yeah,
just came walking out of a cave one day and they couldn't understand the language and they were green in color.
yeah, yeah.
And one of them died after a very short time because he wouldn't eat the food that they had. And the other one, a girl, she grew up and she only ate beans. That's the only thing she would eat. And she learned the language and she explained that she came walking out of a cave from another world where there were two suns in the sky
Oh wow.
and there were people like her everywhere.
A kind of a dimensional portal, possibly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
coming in
Yeah.
from a parallel universe. The green children from Wolf Pit. If you Google that, you're gonna have an interesting reading.
I'm gonna check that out.
Yeah, and
Probably the same people as the Green Man in the Quran, probably.
yeah, yeah, and now you're teaching at a university, yeah, university or a higher institution of learning at least, and writing like this and talking like this. Do you ever get any flack from the people that you work with?
Well, that's a great question. So I'm an adjunct professor, so which gives me a little bit more freedom. I'm not worried about getting tenure at a university. I think that if I was on a tenured track or tenured, I'd have to be more careful about what I say. I would still say the exact same thing that I'm saying to you
Yeah.
now. I just wouldn't care. But it does give you some leeway to say more. And the school that I teach at, they're very very supportive um, of what I do. So, um, but yeah, within I think that the majority of academia has a lot of pushback, from these ideas. I was on another podcast earlier, and I was talking about how their secularism. I'll be careful how I say this, has almost become kind of a religion in and of itself. And by secularism, I mean that there is a complete exclusion of anything that is deemed not of the natural world.
Yeah.
Um, and I think I think secularism can be helpful in kind of curbing some of the excesses of that we find in religion. But when it becomes kind of a blinder for uh, objective research, that becomes a problem where people close themselves off and say, "Look, I'm not going to even fathom this possibility or fathom that this could happen because I'm so set into kind of, I guess another word I can use is materialism, my materialistic worldview. That only what I can see is what I believe." And I think that permeates academia. And so when you talk about things such as ancient astronaut theory, or the giants, or just bring a different perspective there, or talk about, with technology that ancient groups such as the Vikings and the Romans may have had, what we could do, computer software and stuff now. That is, there's going to be a lot of pushback um, with that.
Yeah.
And I know people, everybody who has, discussed the issues that you've discussed. I know some people who have PhDs on top of PhDs on top of PhDs, and usually they have to leave academia at some point in order to really argue for their positions,
Yeah.
because they just no longer can do it within academia.
That's a shame.
Yeah, yeah.
That really is a shame because it's on the fringes of fear and the fringes of the unknown that you find the real truth, and that's
Hmm.
where the
Absolutely.
discoveries happen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, guys, well, do you feel like academia as a unit is opening up more, being more flexible towards these things?
Yes, yes, I do. I think slowly, even in the pushback, just that they're willing to entertain ideas and to kind of debate with ideas that they wouldn't have 10 or 15 years ago. I think they are opening up. I mean, at this point, and I think pop culture has a lot to do with this, shows like Ancient Aliens. At this point, academia cannot just sit in a bubble. It has to address, people are raising these issues. Researchers are raising these issues. Laypersons are raising these issues. So just as with the government with UFOs, they have to address this somehow, even if that's debate, even if that's pushback. And I think within the debate, it's kind of opening up doors for things. There was, and I'm blanking on the name of the person, but a Harvard physicist who recently wrote a book, Extraterrestrial, about the so-called comet that flew by, and basically arguing in a very scientific and academic manner that this was, and persuasively and effectively, and I think he hit the nail on the head. This wasn't just a freaking comet; it was a UFO. It was an extraterrestrial spacecraft, and he
Mhm.
argues that, this is a dude who's tenured at Harvard, got a hell of a lot of pushback from this, um, but you know, forced to kind of address issues that academia would not have touched 10 or 15 years ago, which is UFO contact, ancient UFO contact, and he does this from a very kind of he's academic. He does it from a very kind of systematized uh, standpoint, and argues very persuasively.
Mhm.
I think we'll see more of that in the future.
Yeah, that you're talking about that long, elongated.
Yes, yes. What's it? It has a Hawaiian name. Yes, exactly.
Mhm. Yeah, I forget the number on that they put on it, but the shape of it was kind of unusual, and
Hmm.
the trajectory it came through the solar system was impossible.
Yes, yes.
It,
If you
according to
talk,
gravitics, it couldn't happen.
yeah, I'm friends with. some of some of the most well-known physicists in the world. When I did my undergrad, I took courses in astronomy and stuff like that. So these professors became my peers. You ask any physicist or astronomist, no comet moves like that. No comet looks like that.
That's
And all the attempts that academics have given to kind of explain it as a comet fall flat on their face. And to anybody who has a little bit of free will, you know that this was not a comet. This was
yeah,
a UFO. This was a deliberately sent extraterrestrial spaceship that was exploring um, this region of our galaxy. So yeah,
yeah. Boy, oh boy. Well, that makes you think, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah,
And now we were just touching on the alien walking among us here, and you see anytime you get on the internet, you see posts about alien presence and all that, and there's pictures, there's videos, there is artifacts out there that cannot be done.
yeah,
The composition of it is then impossible. There are things like that. So the concept of the alien presence has been well established. Even the FBI website,
yeah,
I forget the exact, can't think of the exact place in there. But if you go in and extraterrestrial in the search bar, you probably end up there.
yeah,
And they talk about that, yes, it's an old document right on the FBI website, but the FBI agent wrote that says after extensive study, we find that they are an extraterrestrial presence, but we find them to be interdimensional.
yeah. So that's I think I know what document you're talking about. This is back in the 1940s.
Yes,
And the guy says basically they're interdimensional and they correspond. The best correspondence he could give was with the dimensions described in Buddhism and Hinduism, so Barbello and those type of realms, which isn't really an exact correspondence, but he said he used that as kind of an example of how to describe the extraterrestrials in relation to us.
yeah,
Very fascinating document. Not a lot of people know about it. And it's funny, Agi, speaking about how slow disclosure of information. If you go to that document, there's a lot of stuff blacked out, but there's enough for you to read and know what's going on there. But I'm glad you mentioned that document. I think anybody should read that. Everyone should read that document before they die. Very fascinating. Yeah.
aren't you looking forward to June? That's when the executive orders 6 month is up, and the federal government is obligated to release the UFO information.
Yes, yes, and we have the president beforehand, to thank for that. So
Yeah,
there was a lot of um, I know there were a couple other presidents before that time who were trying to get it done and just didn't work out. And
yeah.
finally, we're gonna get some of those documents.
No, they didn't get access before, but Trump he put
Yeah,
on an executive and one that could not be redone. It could not be done away
yeah, because
with
that's what they
because
tried to do in the past. Yeah, and that's
yeah,
how they've been
because
able to keep it closed.
yeah,
Yeah,
he handed it over to the military, and the civilian government cannot do away with anything that is in the hands of the military. So he saved it for us. So the due date is coming in June. So after that, it's going to be fun to see what we will get.
yeah, yeah. And I think
I'm
slowly with the Pentagon reveals, I think they're slowly prepping us up towards that time point. So
Mhm.
and I think, like you said, I mean, you said it in your movie. The people are ready for this. I think they've been ready for a while, and let's just have, we should have faith in, the people to be able to accept this without the apocalypse happening. I don't think the apocalypse will happen. I think on the contrary, this will be something that has the potential for unifying us as a human race. We need that right now because there's so many things and groups and
Yeah.
stuff trying to divide us.
Yeah, there's a couple of people that have to go away first, but then there's a chance for it.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your book the one about from Egypt to Ohio. What do you got in there?
Well, basically, this is so a lot of books on giants will kind of discuss what their culture was like in North America, and I do that. But I also want to see if I could find what really was kind of the impetus for this book was trying to find the origin of these giants. So a lot of books will say these were the Hopewell or the Adena. Those aren't their real names; those were given to them later by researchers and archaeologists. But there was just the Hopewell and the Adena. Nobody says, where these people were from. It's just, oh, they had these cool mounds and earthworks, and that's the end of the story. So I wanted to see if I could, trace their line back to a point of origin, looking, at their culture and the features of their culture. And in doing that, I was able, what I argue is that they're able to be traced back to the old world, to the Near East, to kind of this hybrid fusion of giants and Israelites that you get beginning in the time of Noah. Noah himself was one of these giants. He doesn't have a natural birth. If you read the book of Enoch, you'll know that. And continuing down to the time of King David, and when all of these bad things happened to the people of Israel, the Assyrian captivity, the Babylonian captivity, the Roman destruction, they keep fleeing. They know from previous flights and people coming back and Israelites coming back and forth. So it wasn't just a one way going across the Atlantic, but they're coming back. They know the routes and they go there for state. They go to North America for safety, and they establish their own civilization there. And that's why so much of the Hopewell and Adena, so much of their culture displays parallels with ancient Israel.
Boy, that could get interesting.
Yes, yes, it was a very fun book to write. So I draw a lot on the Old Testament material, some traditions in the Book of Mormon, and also Midwest American archaeology.
Hmm. Do you get into any of the old scriptures that's, in one religion they speak of it one way, and in another one they speak of something another way, but they're really speaking about the same thing?
Yeah, yeah. So from Egypt to Ohio, I mainly focus on just mentions of giants in the Old Testament, but there are mentions all over the world in various scriptural texts in various cultures. And that's one of the things I want to eventually pursue in more detail. So um, we talked about um, ancient Indian texts, but also in a lot of the European texts, so Irish traditions, German traditions, what we would consider apocrypha or legends of the people. You get these references to giants and giants described in a way very similar to the giants of North America and giants who often, for example, Gog and Magog in English, in British legend, straight from the Bible.
Hmm.
So
When you
there's that
started.
connection to both worlds, the North American, ancient North America, and the biblical world.
Hmm. When you studied history as much as you have, and you go back in time, where do you find the first human? Is it like maybe in the Sumerian text, 245,000 years ago, they splashed down in the Arabian Sea and swam to shore? Or is it somewhere else? What do you find?
Well, that's an excellent question. So, one, I think that human beings were experiment from the powers that be, whether you want to use the theological term God or something else, extraterrestrials, whatever those Elohim and those beings of light were. And then secondly, I think we've been around a lot longer as human beings than traditional evolutionary biology would argue for. So I don't want to knock Darwinianism. I think that there is evidence for different groups appearing. So you have Cro-Magnon man, you have the Denisovans. Those do pop up, and then they go away. But I think you have human beings just like you and me living for millions and millions of years. Michael Cremo, in his book Forbidden Archaeology,
Yeah.
he talks about bones of human beings, Homo sapiens, just like us, that date to millions of years ago in unexpected places. So he found one in Philadelphia, what's modern day Philadelphia, of I think it was an arm bone of a human being just like us dating to millions of years, and this kind of flies to the face of Darwinianism, which says that we are recent. So I think that I think something created us as an experiment, and we've been here much longer, millions of years, in fact, to history, to a point in history that can no longer be remembered. And I think we've been going in cycles. I think you see this with the giants, for example, but I think human history um, also exhibits this. There are cycles where great civilizations will rise, they get too prideful, they get too arrogant, they get too stupid, they'll fall, and it continues on and on again.
Yeah.
So kind of like reincarnation, you do this thing until you get it right. So
Yeah.
we need to get it right at some point, and I think one of the great things about studying the ancient past is that it's a lesson for us as we go on into our future.
Yeah. Millions of years ago, people like us, and a lot of millions of years, because in Texas there is a human footprint next to a dinosaur footprint
Hmm.
in the same
Yep.
mud back then that is
How'd that
hardened
happen?
into stone now.
How'd that happen if the dinosaurs were long gone by the time we popped up? Yep, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
we've been around a while,
Yes, we have, absolutely.
but the problem is that we're probably in the fifth or the sixth civilization that has destroyed themselves, or
Yeah, yeah.
I hope
I
we're not
often,
going to have.
yeah, yeah. I often think of one of the shows I like. I like the original more than the new one, but the new Battlestar Galactica, there was kind of a theme where you had an ancient civilization that was really high tech and really great, and they basically nuked themselves, so everything went back to primitive again and had to rebuild for thousands of years. Gets back up to like a technological height and destroys itself. So, like you said, Agi, I hope that doesn't happen to us. Not that certain groups of people aren't trying.
Oh, they're trying all right. They're trying to do away with 90%, so it gets a little rough out there.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh well. But what is next for you now? You said there's another book brewing.
Yes, yes. So I have a book that I'm working on right now, more on kind of the Hebrew giants. I wanted to go into more detail because from Egypt to Ohio, I talk about the general kind of Israelite giants, but I don't really talk about specific famous figures. There are a couple famous figures, as I kind of hinted at with King David, whom whom I think could be identified as at least being of extraordinarily tall height, if not giants themselves. So I'm working on that right now, and I actually this year was kind of rough. My dad, who I was very close to, he passed in April, so I kind of had taken a break with everything, but I'm slowly getting back into writing this book and just into researching um, Midwestern Midwestern American civilization, so ancient Midwestern civilization. So that's my hobby. That's something that I absolutely love doing, and slowly I'm getting back into that. I'm hoping this summer, with the time off as a teacher, I'll be able to get into that in more detail. So just working on that book and researching are the two things I'm doing right now.
Well, it's so much fun to create a book like that.
Yes, yes.
It
So
really is.
yeah,
You can't get enough of it. You just got to get up early and do what you can and do all those things that you must do, and then you get back to what you like to do again.
yep, yep. I have a wonderful spouse, and sometimes she'll let me, she'll buy a hotel room for me and say, Adam, just go there and just write. So I'll spend a day, just working on a book, and yeah, it's a blast. I'll put on my
Oh,
some of my favorite music and uh, good stuff, very good stuff.
yes, it is. Gosh, let us know again where they can get a hold of you and how they can reach you and get your books and so on.
Absolutely. So I have a author site on Amazon that has From Egypt to Ohio and a couple of the other Old Testament books that I've written that I use in my Old Testament course. I also have my Instagram site, Adam the Giant Guy 2019. If you just type in Adam the Giant Guy, it'll pop up. I'm always posting stuff about giants and archaeology on that. And I also have a tutoring site, since my main job is as that of a Latin teacher, which has kind of morphed Agi into an ancient civilization site in general called Lingua Classica, and that can be found on Facebook. I also contribute daily articles to, monthly articles to Ancient American magazines. So you guys can find me in any of those places.
Okay, that sounds very good. And I know from my experience, his listeners out there, he's very approachable. If you friend him on Facebook, and that way you can start talking, and he's a well of knowledge. So just do it. And we are down to the end of the show. So, gosh, you've been here twice before, and now this one. And if it's okay with you, I want you back again because we're having so much fun here.
It's always a pleasure. Anytime, Agi.
That sounds great. Okay, and we will be back next week with another guest, and Nori will be with us. So thank you for watching, and good night.